Our speaker is Rohana Subasinghe. He is the FAO Senior Liaison Officer for Aquaculture. What we're trying to do at the Liaison Office of the FAO here is to bring some of our technical experts to share some of their new research and some of the projects that they're working on. Aquaculture is one of the topics that everywhere we went, we were being, my apologies, we've been asked to talk about how do you feed the world of 9 billion people by 2050, but thinking about the fish component, the aquaculture component. So we brought Rohana to Washington, D.C. for the last 2 weeks, and he's been all over town to discuss the issues, and I'm very happy to have him here. And ICCF has been an amazing partner of the FAO, and we're really happy to collaborate with them. Rohana, the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Sorry for a few minutes late. It's a hot afternoon in DC, so we managed. Since we are already running short of time, and I'm not going to go into more details, I'm also going to give you probably 15 minutes slide, sort of I would say a snapshot of what aquaculture is and what fish is all about in food, and that we will engage for maybe 20 minutes of discussion on issues that you would like to sort of know. Please. We all know what the population in the world now is. We all know how the population is growing. We know where, I presume that we know all of them, and how the various regions in the world is going to be behaving over the next 20 years, 30 years, and 9.4 billion people by 2050, and that we think the food production has to be increased at least by 60 to 70% by the 2050, 2030, if we are to feed the world. And that while doing so, I'm not talking more into food, but focusing on fish, the fish consumption in the world has been increasing, steadily increasing. Right now, on average, we eat about 19.2 kilograms of fish per person per year in the world, which is a very small volume compared to many, but there are regional differences, there are country differences, and if you even take United States, I think we are talking about over 34 kilograms of fish per person per year is eating. So this number is increasing, so we believe we see an increased affinity for fish in the world as food. This particular table, just to show you a little bit about a small comparison of fish against other animal proteins. And you have bivalves, of course, you know the oysters and bivalves and mollusks and sort of marine, and the finfish mainly both marine and freshwater. And we're talking about beef, chicken, pork, finfish, and bivalves. There are 6 different indicators over there, and we're talking about food conversion ratio, protein efficiency, nitrogen emission, phosphorus emission, land requirement per hectare ton of production, and also freshwater use. Fish is far more superior to many, and fish has a much better food consumption ratio. Fish, of course, requires a freshwater fish 5,000 metric cubic meters of water per ton of fish. But having said that, if you're talking about you're doing it in the sea, you basically don't need any water. There is no use of water as such. First 2 columns, since we are not fed these bivalves, you're talking about nitrogen emission and phosphorus emission, they are negative. Why? Because these species extract nitrogen and phosphorus from the environment. If you can farm fish, bivalves, and seaweeds together, what we call IMTA, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, while one animal is excreting into the system both nitrogen and phosphorus, the other one will extract it from the environment. So it will become a more environmental cleaning tool rather than even a production system, although it is highly productive. So basically, fish is a superior in terms of food production compared to many meat. This graph is a very clear indication of how aquaculture sector has been growing for the past 20 years, and fisheries production coming from the sea fish has stagnated almost, and that we are not increasing the volume of fish coming from the sea anymore. There's a lot of control measures in place, a lot of to reduce the fishing efforts. At the same time, just to give a chance for the little bit of a breathing time for the seas to replenish its stocks. But while the number of people are increasing in the world and that the mouths are increasing and there is a demand, so we produce more fish from aquaculture now. Right now, this year, we believe we will pass the 70 million tons of fish, edible fish or food fish production this year from aquaculture, which will come almost close to 50% of what we eat coming from aquaculture. As I always say, 20 years ago when I joined FAO, I said 1 out of every 5 fish that you eat come from aquaculture. Today I tell you 1 out of every 2 fish that you eat come from aquaculture. That's a sector which grows fastest food producing sector in the world, which is much faster than any meat, any other animal protein sector. The production mainly comes from China. As any other commodity, I believe China is a huge economy, huge community, 1.3 billion people, 60% from China, 90% from Asia, and the rest of the 10% is all other regions, including North America, South America, and the Africas and Oceania. So the bulk is from Asia, and bulk is consumed in Asia. At the same time, a lot has been exported, and that you consume in the United States and many other regions, including Europe, are being consumed also. Let me give you a few facts about aquaculture. As I said, the fastest growing food producing sector in the world, no doubt. It has been like that for the past 20 years, and I think it will continue as the same for the next 20 years. And the aquaculture is one of the most sustainable animal protein production systems. I didn't use the word arguably, but I think there is no argument. So I believe, and we have enough evidence to show you how sustainable it is. Of course, sustainability can be improved at every point. There is a requirement and a need to improve the sustainability of the sector. But having said that, looking at some other animal protein production systems, fish is a sustainable production system. Aquaculture contributes significantly food security and poverty alleviation. We have nearly 40 million people involved in aquaculture and aquaculture production in the world. And it, of course, gives you primary production, secondary production, and involvement of women in various sectors along the chain, and that it certainly has a contribution to the livelihoods and people. Aquatic proteins, in my opinion, is much more nutritious and healthier than the animal proteins. It has some special amino acids and the FUFAs, which absolutely cannot be replaced from anything else. And with that, not only that, there are hidden side of fish in nutrition. There are special trace elements, metals, which are absolutely essential micronutrients, which only some of the fish give you. Particularly, I'm not talking about salmon, I'm not talking about tuna, but in a place like Bangladesh, where we have a little fish, a family is catching from the river and eating, that gives you the right type of nutrient, including trace metals, elements which are necessary for the first 1,000 days of a child, the development, your brain development, your human development, and of course for the lactating mothers. Therefore, fish has a particularly important role to play in early life and lactating women, and also in that sense in the community. We believe, although everyone talks about environmental risks of aquaculture, yes, we do, we understand, but we think the investment risks of aquaculture co-varies with the environmental risks, and therefore the sustainability. We can find solutions. We can find solutions to aquaculture where the problems are. We can make investments on those, and that those investments will co-varies with the environmental risks and will improve sustainability. This, I'm sure you've seen that. We believe by 2030, no, please next up. Yep. We believe that by 2030, Asia will host 64% of the global middle class, and it will consume at least 40% of the middle class food. So we are talking about a region which will be wealthier, which will be hopefully healthier, and which has a tremendous amount of demand. And this reflects the economic growth of the world in general, GDP growth of the countries. This is for you to just to show a little bit of research that we've done for looking at the future. On the left-hand side, the graph upper is the population growth. The bottom graph is we're talking about the GDP growth in some countries. We do not have much information. We have about until 2020. These are the IMF information. The right-hand side, the table, we're talking about different regions of the world. The 2007 fish demand means how much fish we ate. Demand is that we believe, demand is how much we ate. So with our figures, we have figures only go up to 2007, 2008 so far in terms of consumption. Although we know the production, the consumption data comes always late. 140 million tons we ate in 2007. We believe with the projections of the population growth and the economic growth by 2030, we will be requiring 261 million tons of fish, which is well over 120 million tons more than what we had in 2007. And this question is an achievable task. If you do not produce that, then there will be deficit of fish between demand and supply. Automatically prices will go up. The people, how much they will eat, per capita consumption will go down, and it will certainly affect what I told about these people who are depending on the fish and as a nutrient source. This graph, this table tells you about the deficit. In the world, there will be a 50 million tons deficit because the supply, we believe, by 2030 will be 2,210, not the demand, the supply. Why the supply? Supply means that we believe there won't be more fish coming from the sea, but aquaculture will increase from present 70 million tons to 2,210 by 2030. The demand will be 261. So definitely we have a 50 million tons a deficit of fish by 2030. Those deficits are different in different regions. Of course, you could see that Asia having the highest deficit. This is a graph for you to see the growth rate of aquaculture. As I said, aquaculture is still the fastest growing food producing sector. It increases its production. Current production rate of increase is around 5.6, 6.2, depends, and also depending on the region. But in general, what we have seen is blue is 80s, red is 90s, a green is first decade of 2000. You can see every region, the aquaculture growth is declining. If the business as usual, with this declining rate of growth of aquaculture, we will not be able to get to that 261 million tons. If the aquaculture sector going to behave the same way as it does now, with a reducing rate of growth, by 2030, annual percent rate of growth will be 4. With that 4%, we will not be able to achieve that 261 million tons of production. In order to get that 261 million tons, you will be requiring something around 5.6% rate of growth, which is an increase from 1.5% increase. Increasing production sustainably is always a daunting task. If you do not have the right mechanisms, if you do not have the right governance, if you do not have the right frameworks and policies, that production increase can go haywire. It'll end up in environmental repercussions, social repercussions, everything. Therefore, we need to be prepared. We need to work. The governments have to come up with the right framework, the right policy frameworks, regulatory frameworks, governance mechanisms, and of course, sourcing the resources. Therefore, we need a concerted effort. that concerted effort can come only through working together, the governments, the donors, the supporters, all other players who are interested in working together. Of course, we have still a lot of big fish in the sea, and we do have a lot of big fish in rivers, but still that 50 million can only come from aquaculture. If we do that, and then everybody will be happy. Thank you very much.
First, I just say thanks for coming. That was really informative, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here. I actually work on the marine fishery side of things, so this is a pretty interesting topic. But of course, my concern tends to come from when we harvest wild fish populations in order to provide fish meal for farmed fish, because that seems to not really improve our situation in terms of food security. And it seems like one of the problems we have with that is that people like to eat fish higher up on the food chain. We like to eat salmon as opposed to sort of more of a bottom feeder. And I was wondering if you had any ideas about maybe some of the things that we could do to encourage people to eat sort of lower on the food chain in that sense, or encourage those types of aquaculture as opposed to the types that require wild inputs.
Thank you. You're very right. Let me give you 2-3 points on that. Yes, fish meal is something extremely important commodity. It's extremely important a resource for aquaculture development. Fish meal production in the world is almost stagnant, sort of nothing else. But aquaculture sector currently use about 75% of the fish meal in the world. 75%. Aquaculture sector is growing. Feed industry is growing. Feed is produced in much large quantities than we used to be. So to feed carnivorous fish, we need fish meal. But we produce more herbivorous and omnivorous fish in the world than carnivorous. Although there is a serious affinity for high-value species in the north, among the developing countries where most of the fish are consumed, they are not the high-value ones. They are in the low in the food chain ones. Carps, various filter feeders, freshwater species, right? And then for us to make fish, to bridge that 25 million, as I always say, that cannot be from the high in food chain fish. It has to be non-fed, low in food chain fish, majority has to come. But for your information, for you to be happy about the fish meal issue, in 1975, when we fed 50% of the protein come from fish meal in a salmon diet, today we only use 5 to 6% fish meal in a salmon diet. So Norwegians vow that they will produce probably the first vegetarian salmon by 2017, right? So the question is does it have the same nutrition value? Yes, it does, because you can get the omega-3s from other sources other than fish oil and fish meal. So science is advancing very positively. We are managing very well the fish meal issue. I don't think we will get into the fish meal trap in our quest to prepare that 51 million tons. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Kelsey Jacobson. I work with Congresswoman Lois Capps. And I wanted to say that I appreciate your comment about how the investment risk of an aquaculture operation co-varies with the environmental risk, because there are certainly environmental feedbacks that can harm the aquaculture operation. And we've seen examples of that, like the Chilean salmon farming, and even now in Asia with the shrimp farms that are having problems with diseases. But I wanted to ask, I'm hopeful that the technology will improve to such a point where we can avoid these environmental catastrophes, and I wanted to get your thoughts on how the technology is growing along with the demand for seafood, and whether you think it'll catch up.
Once again, you're well conversed group. I'm happy to be in front of you. The disease in Asia that you mentioned, shrimp disease, unfortunately, it is in Mexico now, right? So I don't know how long it'll take before it comes to United States. Every disease is an environmental threat. The diseases fly, and they fly with fish, right? They don't fly alone. Unfortunately, that's been the case, and it will be the case. Now, for talking about the environmental risks and how to avert the risks and the investment, technology, yes, it is very important, and that technology development is happening, and tremendous amount of research going in, including using with the private sector as well as academicians and the countries, many. Unfortunately, developing countries are still not really into that, although they are the main consumers of the low-value, low-in-food chain species. And we need to definitely increase the awareness of how important the research to find the various environment impacts and sort of how to mitigate those impacts. The good thing about aquaculture is that, as I said, this very simple looking at old schools of thought like multi-trophic aquaculture, like polyculture, where you can do getting out from single species culture will give you a lot of opportunity to improve the environment. And I think this is happening, and environment impacts we have seen catastrophic things in the world, but for your information, working with FAO, I can tell you the governments are how concerned they are now and how much effort they are putting into regularizing the production systems and the practices and putting more and more enforceable laws and sort of governance measures so that the production should, but definitely there is more room for improvement.
Hi, I'm Jerry Miller. I'm president of a new entity called Science for Decisions. But until this spring, I was the assistant director for ocean sciences at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where we talked a lot about food security and fisheries, of course, in that context. So I have several questions for you, but let me focus on just one. Early on in your presentation, you talked about the trends in fish supplies, and the graphic showed that around 1980, the growth in capture fisheries sort of came to a halt. It plateaued out at about 90 million tons per year. And that plateau is the same time period during which aquaculture was growing quite rapidly. So can you tell us the underlying reasons for that? Was it a matter of companies that had been investing in capture fisheries now shifting their investments to aquaculture? Or was it independent investments that perhaps made aquaculture more competitive in the market and that slowed the growth of capture fisheries? And the underlying question, where I really want to go with this, is how do we incentivize, getting back to your point late in your presentation about the need to continue the growth of aquaculture, how do we incentivize that growth given that historical trend?
Yes. Thank you. I think the increase in the growth of aquaculture in mid-80s or rather early 80s happened for two reasons. Number one, when the supply from the oceans are becoming stagnant, then of course there was a deficit. So there was a demand with a less supply, so somebody has to produce. This world is, we all are human beings. When there is a demand, we always supply. We don't worry about where we are working and within what framework we are working. We just will supply. That's why it goes haywire, sort of. So that happened. I think when that happened, at the same time, there were several major political and global initiatives on aquaculture in late 70s. Particularly, I don't know whether you ever heard of Kyoto Conference on Aquaculture by the UN. That was in Japan, 1976. That was the first time countries got together to look at what potentials, what opportunities do we have to increase production through aquaculture. 76, probably Norway was producing a couple of thousand tons, basically. Today, Norway produces 1,100,000 tons of salmon. So the awareness and the demand basically brought the supply, right? And with the awareness, when everybody started exploring aquaculture, aquaculture is very different from terrestrial animals, because terrestrial animals, how many animals we grow, I can count them by my 10 fingers, whereas we have more than 350 species of fish and shellfish we grow and we consume. So the opportunities were better. The environments were better, all marine, brackish water, fresh water. So there was a trust by the countries to increase production. I think that's what happened. Of course, the underlying number one reason for increased production is demand, because it is business, basically. There is no one produce fish in the world to eat anymore. There was one time, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Even Africa, small and medium enterprises are the ones which are thriving, not necessarily a very small scale backyard type farming is going out of business. Now, having said that, and so many, how to improve, how to increase, that's why I said, I think we need a very concerted effort. All my 2 weeks here, I was here talking to various US-based agencies, and your State Department, your DA, your USAID, Millennium Challenge Corporation, you name it, many over the past 2 weeks. How can we all come together to join hands in a platform for development, platform for improvement, a concerted effort, which requires for the next 20 years? Thank you.
Sorry to sort of change tracks again, but I just had one other question. Again, on the marine side, we're interested in this idea of seafood traceability or labeling accountability, and that's really a struggle because the oceans are a pretty big place, and it's hard to identify maybe exactly where something came from and who it passed through. And it seems like aquaculture is maybe a great opportunity to set up some models for, it was raised in this farm by this people, we can trace it here, and then ending up at the consumer. So I was wondering if you had any ideas of case studies or models of that being done now, maybe could be good examples for what we could do elsewhere.
Thank you. You touch upon a subject which is extremely dear to me. I've been working on international guidelines on aquaculture certification for the past 5-6 years, which we managed to get an international agreement through our 195 member governments in 2011. We have internationally agreed set of guidelines for aquaculture certification. So one part of certification is in many places we will see is traceability. Yes, traceability is not easy in the sea. Of course, we have sophisticated vessels in some countries, but most of the little artisanal fishers who goes without nothing, they would know where he's catching. We could say, absolutely no way you can get a serious. But at the moment, your traceability is one step forward, one step backwards. You should be able to trace your product, who you bought from, and who you are selling to. But that's 2013, but 2020, it'll be full traceability. So full traceability is a I wouldn't call it nightmare, but it is a very daunting task. And the countries are getting ready for that. IUU fishing is something extremely concerned at the moment, and there are rules and procedures. There is a binding agreement from FAO with the member governments on IUU. And IUU is becoming a very, very increasingly important aspect for trading with the European Union. So countries are slowly getting, opening their eyes and trying to put some efforts into surveillance and monitoring and things. So the traceability in aquaculture, although you think it is very easy, it is not. The simple, yes. Origin, yes, absolutely no problem. Origin is absolutely easy. But your ingredients, where they come from, not easy. Because most aquaculture, 70% come from small farmers. So if you have a vertically integrated, large commercial farm, you buy your feed from the manufacturer. He will bring it in a truck and, sort of you put it, you know exactly where it comes from. But you go to Bangladesh or Indonesia, one guy from the factory goes to one shop, so 1 ton is taken to another shop, 100 kilos is taken to another shop, and 10 kilos is given to the farmer. So you have already your traceability, your value chain is so long. So that happens while production and also while in your value chain beyond production. So I'm not saying it is difficult. I've been trying to develop a traceability system for aquaculture in Sumatra after the tsunami. When President Clinton told us build back better, so I was working in Sumatra for several months, and we started doing a project we had 35,000 hectares of shrimp land completely devastated after tsunami, and we had more than 20,000 farmers, and we brought them back again. Once again, what we wanted to do is to build back better so that you can have a traceability introduced into the system. We did manage, let's say, 75%, but not 100%. But it doesn't mean there is no hope. Of course, we will get there one day. Thank you.